Thank you. So yeah, PhD means piled higher and deeper. So hopefully you brought your shovels today. Those of you coming from the East Coast, you've gotten a lot of use out of your shovels this year already. I'm going to do a couple things. First thing is that I'm going to walk around a lot because I used to be a professor, and I found that the best way to keep the students awake was to walk behind them. I actually have had the pleasure to both teach at the Air Force Academy and at Stanford. The difference being at the Air Force Academy, I could actually force my students to do push-ups. Stanford students just like, what? You want me to, what? Yeah, so, all right. Really quick, I'm going to run you through 145 slides. No, I'm teasing. That would just be cruel. You've had coffee, but not that much yet. What we're going to talk about today is to solve the sock drawer problem. Right? This is an issue facing the entire industry in which people go through, they get excited, they buy, they use, and they discard. I used to be a designer at IDEO, and one of my colleagues there said that really the difference between a good product and a bad product is how long before it ends up in the landfill. And our task as an industry, especially within the wearables industry, is how do we make sure that we make that time as long as possible? Right? These are not disposable razors. These are products that people are designed to change their lives for the better. So that's what we're going to talk about today is ways to mitigate the risk of the sock drawer. So, got to have a framework, right? It's either 2x2 or something. So we're going to do a little bit of a cycle. There's 1,000 frameworks out there. This is just one I put together for this. And let's think about the consumer journey. There's this kind of buying phase, this kind of learning phase, this using phase, and we hope a succeeding phase. Now, if you kind of have this axis of excitement or perception or whatever thing that turns up to 11 in your mind on the y-axis, this first phase is kind of the elation of anticipation. It showed up. Or look, they have one in stock. Or I can't wait to download. Right? That's what happens a lot. You all know this. You've done this. Either your first smartphone, your first date, who knows what it was, but this anticipation of what's coming next. And then there's this kind of long or short drive to mastery, right, where it's like, okay, I'm now going to figure it, I'm going to do this, I'm going to master this, I'm going to figure this out. And you kind of come down a little bit, but you feel good. It's working. I can figure this out. I can figure out the on button, the off button. We actually, once, I used to work at a touch company. We were mailed in all these different concepts, and we approached a maker of MP3 players with all these cool things you could do with touch. Automatically draw letters to find songs, cool things about gestures to switch back and forth between different playlists, all these great, cool ways to interact with your device. You know what they told us? Well, that's really cool. But let me tell you, the top two things we hear from the customer service line when people call and asking for help, number one, how do I turn it on? Number two, where do I put my music? So if they couldn't figure those two things out, there is no way they're getting to the other features. And that's that distinction between could and should that we'll talk a lot about today. And then there's this euphoria of achievement. Yes! I figured it out. I can do a conference call. This is great. Those of you who remember what life was like before the iPhone remember that conference calls required at least 7 different key taps and 4 recalls before you could actually finally not hang up on grandma. And then ideally, we move to success, where we formed a habit, where now we're refreshing this experience on a regular basis. And we'll talk about what works and what doesn't in that space. That's where we want to go. Unfortunately, sometimes there's a detour in the use case. Sometimes they end up in the sock drawer. And that's the risk we're trying to mitigate. Because that long-term engagement, that move from the novelty, from the anticipation, Siri's going to be my best friend, to the reality of use and reuse and habit, where we go from novelty to utility, that's really important. Because otherwise, what you end up with, we don't want wearables to become what we see in other industries, really expensive coat hangers. Some of you may recognize that's a treadmill under there. Who has a treadmill? Who has a treadmill as a coat hanger? Some of you are honest. Thank you. I appreciate that. But this is what's happening. right? We go through those stages of elation and excitement and the learning curve and understand what we could do with these devices if we could only figure a way to bend either our will to it or its will to us and make it happen. So, brief intro to what we do at Argus Insights other than put up silly pictures. We analyze the Internet of humans. We do that by collecting data from multiple sources, social media, consumer reviews, literally from around the world. We analyze that data, use our own proprietary algorithms, use that to help our customers understand what's happening in the marketplace so they can take action. And we do this across multiple segments, multiple categories. And there's a weird little side benefit of the metrics that we use as we listen to what consumers are talking about in this kind of very broad-based category. We can kind of predict what's going to happen. So, does anyone here actually have the Amazon Fire Phone? There's two. Okay. Do you actually use it? There's one. No. Okay. Yeah. I did this at a conference in Texas, and one guy, he had it for nostalgic reasons. He actually worked on the facial recognition stuff. He says, I don't actually use it. I just have it because, you got to have that. So it launched on July 25th. Huge launch, right? This is going to be amazing, earth-shattering for Amazon. They're finally going to take into the phone space. A month later, we learned that they only sold about 35,000 in the first 25 days. And think about iPhone 6 was 1 gazillion in the first 15 seconds. Not a great launch. On the 28th, because we were listening to what consumers were saying, we said, actually, it's a complete failure. 3 days after launch. Because it turns out a product launch and a rocket launch look a lot alike. You can tell failure pretty soon after what happens. Sometimes they recover. Amazon said it was because of the price. They dropped the price to 99 cents. It went down even further. And to add insult to injury, Greenpeace decided to stage a protest on the Fire Phone. So they started writing nasty reviews even after it was already down. It's like you're just kicking the phone more and more because they wanted Amazon to use green energy. So random stuff. But because of the way we listen, we ended up being very predictive. In fact, we were doing some work for a handset manufacturer and found that our metrics plus their retail sales allowed us to predict their actual demand 8 weeks ahead of time. That's kind of cool. So you'll see us talk a little bit about what we've seen in the wearables market later in this conversation. But first, let's talk about learning curves. Let's talk about that first stage of what's this going to be like, how's this going to work, that out-of-the-box experience, that it's going to work, right? Yeah, can't wait to... So this is the way we all perceive the learning curve for our devices to be. Just a little speed bump. Boom, you're fine. Because we've all read the manuals. We wrote the manuals, right? These are our products. These are our devices. These are the things that we all worked on, put our heart and soul into. This is what the user sees. That's El Capitan in Yosemite. You want me to do what? No, it's just totally fine to basically update the firmware through your Wi-Fi router that I'm sure you've configured correctly. You know what the #1 most returned product at Best Buy was for a while? Wi-Fi routers. It doesn't work. Either the last 12 that you bought. We have this issue with how we bring people through the experience and talk to them about what they want to be able to achieve with this. And if it requires 17 steps in the first 2 minutes, we lose them. So we have to minimize this disruption as much as possible. And so what you're seeing here, and I apologize, the slides will be available and you will be able to see this. This is more of an eye chart than I thought it was going to be. What this is different wearable brands, data from the past, basically since Black Friday. And what you're seeing is the negative comments about installation and setup. The positive are the green, and then the gray is the neutral comments. And what we're basically looking at is people talking about how much they're frustrated with the installation experience. And that's a lot of red. You don't see that much red on tablets. You don't see that much red on smartphones because we've kind of brought people up that learning curve. This is people talking about, and this is data from consumer reviews from retailers around the world, talking about where we have failed them, what's gone wrong. And if you can't do this part, do you think all that cool stuff you did with the app and all those fun, wonderful things you did with the follow-on 6-month campaign to kind of tease them into new and exciting pieces and uses of your wearable technology are going to work? No. Step one, set it up. So we're sort of failing the customers right now. Fitbit ran into this. They were kind of the first ones to roll out in this marketplace, right? Oh, we'll put an accelerometer in a piece of silicone and sell it. And it worked once they fixed a problem. Because we were doing some work for Best Buy, and we were looking at the Fitbit. They'd actually invested in Fitbit. They're excited about it. And we found that the consumer perception, the early adopters didn't like it. They hated it. There was all these issues in getting to that first stage of monitoring and measuring. I mean, you could put it on your wrist. That part they could figure out. But everything else after that was really a challenge. So they changed the entire out-of-the-box experience. Some people call it UBI. I'm like, what? UBI. I'm like, oh, okay. That's a 4-letter acronym. They changed the out-of-the-box experience to the point that they brought people through that journey. They figured out a way to take El Capitan and shrink it to a few speed bumps next to each other. So it's like, oh, hey, this is kind of cool. With no changes in the product. It's packaging, it's messaging, it's how they kind of tease people into the experience. They were really effective about how they designed that first 15 minutes so that the rest of the life of the product was fantastic. Because here's the challenge. We see this in other markets. When the Galaxy Tab came out, do you guys remember the Samsung Galaxy Tab? Some of you may have had one. When it first came out, one of our customers was seeing returns of the Galaxy Tab, of actually any tablet that didn't begin with the letter I, in double-digit rates. And they asked us to go figure out why. So again, we went to the data, because we got data for that, and tried to listen to what the consumers were talking about. And what we found was that when people got their Galaxy Tab home, they're excited. It's not an iPad, it's something different. Because I'm thinking different, because I'm a Samsung customer. And they get it out, and they think about all the commercials they saw on television and all the ads they saw on Google about how, with the Galaxy Tab, you could bring in your family movies, you could show people pictures of what you'd taken, you could do all these different cool things with it. And they get out of the box, and they go to sync it with their laptop or their desktop to show people what they could do with their tablet. And there's no cable. In order to cut the BOM costs, Samsung had not shipped a USB cable with the device, which meant your first 15 minutes was actually repackaging it and taking it back to Best Buy. So you have to think through all these pieces, little by little by little, about where can we... Clayton Christensen talks about disruptive innovation as a good thing. It's bad for consumers. And we continually disrupt the consumers in ways that we don't quite understand. We can anticipate, actually. We can fix it. You just got to think through it. Because one of the challenges we have in teaching design to engineers at Stanford is that the engineers come in really designing for two people, themselves and mom. Because mom loves everything we do, right? Oh, that's so nice, John. Thanks, Mom. And we have to expand the horizons, and that's what we do, is we help bring that information into play. So here's the other thing that's coming up in the wearable space. This is where they're made. Right? Clean room environments. People wearing, this is actually iPads being made at Foxconn, but think about it. It's a very sterile place. This is where they're made. And this is where the advertising likes to tell us where they're being used. Here I am walking through the streets of Chicago with my Moto 360. I am ready to go out on night of the town. I am really nice with this thing, but wait a minute. Wearables are exposed to environments even we don't subject our phones to. And it's really hard to put an OtterBox on my wrist. Otherwise, it looks like some kind of communicator from an 80s sci-fi movie, right? And this is where these things are really being used, right? And we don't have rain in California anymore. Something about the legislators didn't want it or something. But, and those of you from out of state, you're supposed to bring a gallon of water with you on the airplane. And so we have to think about these environments too. Or triathletes trying to do this stuff. Now, what is on his wrist? He's got something. He's wearing something. I can't tell through all the mud, but these are the environments that people are actually using these devices in. And you would say that, well, John, these are just the fitness bands. We dig into the data, and the top, so we basically have what on the side is the different locations where people are talking about using this. Outdoors, number one. And on the top is smartwatches, and the next one is fitness bands. People are talking about their smartwatches being used outdoors as much as, if not more, as a percentage of customers than fitness bands. Because I'll wear my fitness band in the gym. Well, yeah, like I go to the gym. We walk our daughters to school. My wife runs back. I walk. It takes her 15, takes me 45. And so, it's outside. It's in the bathroom. Not that we're using the wearables in the bathroom. Oh, look, I'm in the potty. It's more in the shower. And we don't take these off. We've been trained, for those of us who actually grew up wearing a watch, which is fewer and fewer these days, we take this everywhere. This is in our extremities. We're doing things with this. My phone is in my back pocket. It's being protected by my front. This is where things can get hit, get snagged on stuff. It's in the real world, more than anything else. Close to my fingers in which I interact with things. We want to use these in environments where we don't use other things. I'm not going to go for a marathon with my laptop. I'm not going to do a marathon anyway, but imagine I want to track my heart rate as I'm going down the slopes in the snow in the Sierras, which there is none this year. But I'm not going to bring that on my laptop. I'm not going to put that in my bag. I'm not going to carry my tablet with me. I might have my phone, but it's going to be encased in like 7 layers of Charmin tissue. I can't do that with this. And yet, we're asking them to treat this the way they treat other smart devices. We're asking them to change their habits and behaviors in ways that don't fit their lifestyles. Rather than fitting the consumers, we're asking them to fit the device. And that's not the path to adoption. So here's actual quotes from people talking about bad chafing, the touchscreen's overly sensitive, can't take a shower because when I take a shower, it thinks I'm swiping through the menus. La, 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 la. Okay, Google, and dial something while you're in the shower because it swiped through, and grandma's getting some weird selfies on your Galaxy Gear. That's just not cool. That's wrong. So that's another challenge that we have to figure out, is how do we start putting those pieces in place to make sure that the technology fits the user as opposed to forcing the user to fit the technology. Some of you may remember Palm Pilots. Some of you, when I say Palm, you're like, yeah, it's right here. I'm like, no, it's a company. So Palm Pilots were great because rather than trying to do what Newton and the other pen computing devices were doing to understand every possible scribble, they used us as a solution. I had to learn a new alphabet in order to use the Palm Pilot because this was more elastic than the silicon at the time. Now I'm not so sure, but Palm used a human solution to a technology problem. With wearables, we should be well beyond that. Otherwise, it's going to be one of those things where, it's like, okay, I'm out in the world, I've got things, this is a basic smartwatch. And what are you doing, John? Well, I'm protecting my wearable. Shouldn't that be on your wrist? Well, I'm worried about it on my wrist. How are you doing the heart rate? I can't tell you because I'm not. I'm not keeping my habits up. So we have to figure out a way around that. And I'm sure there's some technology providers here today that can help with all that stuff because this is a big issue. Because along the path to developing wearables that people actually wear, we have to make sure that they can wear them where they want to wear other things today. Another issue that comes up a lot, I call this the row, row, row your boat problem. The state of the art of gesture integration today on these devices is either taps or swipes. Lots of swipes. So let's say you're trying to find grandma's phone number. And when I say, okay, Google, and say John Feland, Google doesn't recognize Feland. I have to twist my name. Feland. No, only misdemeanors. No, it's crazy. And so I can't use necessarily voice recognition on that stuff. And so one of the things we're finding is that within the day, this is overall wearables. This is from almost 30,000 wearable users talking about what they complain about. Usability is an issue for a lot of them. Right? It's almost 5% of all wearable consumers are complaining about the usability issues. They're complaining about the reliability. Returns are obviously negative. Very few people say something about returns and are happy about it. Woohoo, I got my money back. That didn't work so well for the Amazon Fire Phone. AT&T charged people $35 to take the device back. They were insult to injury. And so usability is a big issue because we're trying to figure out how to use these devices in our lives, in a glance, in a snack, and you'll see some of the details. We're going to go through some of the products when we get to square peg, round hole, where rather than trying to do everything your phone does or everything your tablet does, they're very careful to focus on a few features. And it's when we start to do all these things. I got 25 apps. I mean, how many people didn't watch the Apple Watch stuff yesterday? We were here, but there's a lot of things that happened with Apple yesterday. But part of what they showed was like this game of life bubble diagram of all the apps you can have running on your Apple Watch. Oh my gracious. I have enough trouble with the apps on my phone with this, it's a big screen. It's like, okay, I can find that, but now you want me to do. Let me fix that real fast. Okay, now I'm ready to use my wearable. Yeah, that's the app I want to use. And so we force consumers to go through this. The state of the art is the row your boat, because we're asking them to swipe through things. We see that. Reading text is really tough. Someone gives you an email on your phone, they try to tell you to read it, because you have to get to the end of the notification to shut it off, right? Oh, great, my brother just sent me the entire works of Shakespeare. Well, that was a good sonnet. So we have to somehow get beyond this swipe and poke, because that's what we have today. And Apple wants us to believe that now we're going to have a force poke that's going to add an extra layer of interaction to the overall piece. We'll see. My own experience with force integrated with touch is that there's a learning curve there. A learning curve there that's a lot much harder to actually climb. So this gentleman right here is an IBM Lenovo laptop. It has that little eraser pointer. How many people know what I'm talking about? It's like the little stick in the top. How many people love them? How many people hate them? Yeah. Those that love them climb the El Capitan of the learning curve. Usability experts say that the stick is actually the best pointing device, relative pointing device on competing devices today. It's a force, it's an isometric joystick. That's the best way to do it. Except it takes a long time to come up the learning curve. And those that fall off, that goes in the sock drawer. And it's that force feedback piece. And so we're going to see the same thing potentially with the Apple stuff. We got to think about the usability pieces in here in ways that it makes sense, because it's one thing to have a menu structure and carry all the metaphors over of apps and swiping, but it's another thing to do it with intention. We're seeing these faces get bigger and bigger, not to the point where, we're not to the point. Can I borrow your tablet for real fast? We're not asking people to do this. Can you imagine? I mean, there's plenty of room for gestures on here, but it becomes really awkward in, airport security lines. TSA would have a field day. Sir, could you take off your, because now you can wear your watch through, right? Could you take off, you told me I didn't have to take off my watch. What is that, So we have to balance those pieces out and think about different ways that are interacting that actually drives that engagement and lowers that learning curve. Because if every time I want to adjust something, let's say I want to change an alarm, and I have to swipe through by the second to set my alarm, not that anyone would do that. There's definitely no one in this room. I'll give up. Other people say, well, I have to get to my phone to use my watch. Really? Well, yeah, I got to tether your phone, you got to pair it up, then you can see what's on your watch. I can see what's on my watch. No, you have to then see how it's configured, then you use the bigger screen to do it, which works for those infrequent pieces. But if you have to do that every time, oh my gracious. But you can't do that to people. One of the other weird things that's coming up in the overall piece is this whole force fitting of experiences. But there's two sides to the joke of square peg and a round hole. One of the things that comes out is that actually those watches with round faces are performing better on average than those with square faces. So right now, this is our measure of basically Net Promoter Score from all the users, the volume of conversation around the individual ones. And only recently did the Galaxy Gear come up. As of last month, the LG R and the Moto 360, two round, are the most delightful products on the planet according to consumers today in the smartwatch industry. Now Apple has it come out. We only measure things from people who've actually used products that exist and have been launched in the marketplace. Why? It's a perception thing. Part of it is that, think about it. You're in grade school, clocks are round. There's a certain amount of piece around that. The square is easier from the display standpoint. Round is tough. to build, right? It's like, when was the last time you saw a round smartphone? Nokia had one a long time ago, but it was kind of cute, it was a little compact, bink, But the challenge is perception. There's a class or quality around that. What is it? Is a Rolex square? You can sort of buy a square Rolex, but it's a small part. If you think about watches and what we used to see on a regular basis, again, coming back to the point of how do we minimize disruption, the number of square watch faces for kind of classic, has some kind of thing that goes tick, tick, tick in them, and it's not a bomb, the amount of square faces is very small. Round looks like a watch to us. Square looks like a band. Looks like technology. Round seems like fashion. It's more pleasing to the eye, things of that sort. And we're seeing that bear it out. It's not that, think about the LGR and the Moto 360 and compare it to the Samsungs or even the Fitbit Surge. They're all pretty much a screen with a touch screen on top of it, with a processor and Bluetooth and all those things. All the same basic components. But the way they came together to form the experience is radically different in the minds of consumers. And the poor Surge is down here. People have been buying it, but they're not so excited about it. And then basis is even lower down here. And what's interesting, there's this weird subcategory within Martian. They're not weird because they're named Martian. They're weird because they're part of a minimalistic wearable movement. They're round watches and they do snacking. They just do little bits. The Martian Notifier is effectively a normal watch with a small screen at the bottom. They tells you what your texts are. Because it's 160 characters, you can do that. So you're not trying to write a text, you're just kind of make sense of what's going on. Caller ID, it kind of just notifies you. It's just enough. It's that little piece of adding to your life without having to take over your life. It's a Zen thing. That's actually, it's a Martian thing. But as opposed to the Samsung devices and Sony a little bit too have been more of the Swiss Army knife approach. Let's keep adding blades until we have you seen the Swiss Army champions? They're about 3 feet long. They only fit if you have a big overcoat, You're not getting that on the airplane. And when you do that, you end up with a situation in which you have all these functions, but none of them work quite as well as they would if they were standalone. Right? The corkscrew on the Swiss Army knife works in a pinch 3 times a year. But I got it. Carry it with me all the time, just in case. How many other features are we putting on people's devices that are that way, that fit in that kind of Swiss Army knife mode? A ton. And what's interesting, Huawei's watch, which hasn't been on the market yet is round and may cost $1,000. So it's less than Apple, but less than Apple, but more than LG or Moto. But that drove the most buzz last week in Barcelona. Was it because Huawei had a watch? That was kind of cool. But everyone has a watch now. Was it because Huawei had hired bots to amplify their message over social media? No, ZTE did that. Round is catching people's attention. Not because it's cool and round is all in, but because round minimizes, it fits our perception of what a watch should be. And the more we align with the behaviors that people already have, the better the adoption, the better the stickiness. And so, Fitbit Surge, it's not doing so well. And when we dig into the data to figure out what's driving them nuts, it comes down to concerns or frustrations around the notifications, performance of the GPS, touchscreen, questions about the screen, all the way down the line. And in digging into that piece, you start to see where people are frustrated. It's like, and Fitbit's got it, right? Fitbit's the leader, and we'll see that they're still maintaining a leadership role. They've actually gained share over the holiday season. Partly because if you walked in any place, you got a Fitbit thrown at you for free. Well, not free, but almost free. And it's worked from a strategy standpoint. But with all their knowledge around the fitness bands, I would have expected their watch to perform better, that they would have learned more about how to delight their users based on their past experience. The Surge is not doing so well. And I guess the last piece I'm going to talk about is more around the notion of habit forming, how we build these habits, and where does it come into play. Anybody play Flappy Bird? Yeah, really, their learning curve to play Flappy Bird was about 16 nanometers, right? That was a speed bump. The mastery of Flappy Bird, Everest, I don't know. It was one of those things the kids said, Dad, download Flappy Bird. I'm like, okay. Why am I doing this? But absolutely habit forming because you almost get to that next stage and look, I got up to 25 points. Actually, it was more like 2. But it was habit forming. And this whole notion of gamification is sweeping across so many different industries. It's really taken root in wearables. If we just gamify it, that'll be great. We'll give you points, and you'll get points, and you can turn those points in to get more points, and then you can have points for your points, and then you can buy new power-ups. I'd love to have a power-up. I could actually keep up with my wife up the hill. The challenge is that if you start taking the gamification, if you start going down that path of creating those habits, you lock yourself into a lifelong production problem. And this happened actually with Basis. So Basis had this great idea. We're going to gamify habit forming. And every time you kind of achieve something, you get a bing, you got your habit. And we're going to have a bunch of habits you can pick up along the way, and every day we're going to give you reinforcement for those habits that you get done. They had about 3 months of habits. And then the game was over. They weren't producing content fast enough to keep up with people. They weren't adding new layers of interaction on top of it. I mean, we've already all played Angry Birds. And there's Angry Birds Seasons, Angry Birds Star Wars, Angry Birds, Silicon Valley, in which you can fling Bill Gates through the air. I don't know. But Angry Birds keeps adding new content, new levels, because that's their job as a gaming company. They have to, in order to maintain stickiness, they have to keep adding glue. If you go down the gamification path within wearables, you have to do the same thing. And so eventually, my Basis ended up in the sock drawer because of this. Because I ran out of content that was pulling me along. And all I got reminded, and I had to add habits because that was the only habit I could add that I would never do. Well, now, if you bike 12 miles today, you will do fine on this habit. Oh, man, I'm just lucky if I get 10,000 steps in. And so there was no new content. The game that I started playing was over. And all I got every day were reminders where I had failed. You think that's a good thing for a long-term relationship? You've had those we've all had those relationships, right? You failed again, John. I'm sorry, I'll do better tomorrow. After a couple weeks of that, you're like, all right, I'm not charging that. Pull that out to track my steps for CES. 17,000 one day. Cool. Guess what? When the battery died, I went back in the sock drawer. Because it no longer functioned the way I expected it to. They didn't continue to add pieces to that. If you go down the gamification path to make it sticky, to make it habit forming, you have to keep making glue. And that's a long-term cost. But it's absolutely critical to maintain that engagement, because otherwise we end up in the sock drawer. And so with all these things, there's different ways to think about how we address the challenge of usability and of stickiness in this overall piece. Not all these things will work for all products, but it's a way of thinking about it. Let's see where we're at on time. Okay. So how's Apple going to do? Well, we have some data. That's the great thing about a data company. They announced it yesterday, but we already have starting to pull information from folks about what's going on. Let's go back. When they first announced, because we've been tracking all the social chatter and wearables, we use the social data, Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, to understand what the brand promise is, what the excitement is. Then we do the review data to figure out what the reality is. And it's that review data that ends up being very predictive of where the market's going. So back in September, you all remember where you were that day, or maybe you don't, I don't, but September 9th, bam! Apple's going to have a watch! Woohoo! Huge amounts of buzz. Everyone else is kind of like, what? You can see down here, basically all other brands, Apple crushed everybody that day. And when you look at it, Fitbit was kind of a really far behind second place kind of situation. And Samsung and Pebble were basically, they were below the noise floor. Those are the engineers in the audience know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this week, yesterday, woohoo, strong. Not as strong. The interest had dropped. A lot of things have happened between then, a lot of other announcements. See that peak right ahead? Well, and obviously, and now Fitbit has actually clearly got a lot more mind share in what's going on. Now Apple's just doubled, not 8 times, what Fitbit's conversations are. And then Pebble Time, Mobile World Congress last week, grabbed almost as much mind share as Apple did. Now, Pebble folks are a special group. They are very passionate users, incredibly passionate. They like this kind of balance of just enough. What does this mean for Apple? And then poor Samsung's still down in the noise. What does this mean for what Apple's running into? The anticipation is waning. And also the $10,000 price tag. It's like my daughter said, how many could you get and still get a minivan? I'm like, OK, don't. It's. So this is actually looking at the volume of review data. And we use this as a proxy to see where the market's going, both from it's kind of our mind share data, but it also tracks to market share quite nicely. And this is earlier this year. You can see the trajectory is going up, that wearables overall has been growing as anticipation has been rising, as people have been excited about where the market's going. And then Apple Watch is announced. And it starts to crash. We saw all the consumers kind of go, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait and see what happens. So the question is, were they going to wait until April? No. Same data now, it's the entire year up until the end of February. So that's where the watch was announced. Look where demand has gone. Holiday was amazing. People didn't wait. They didn't wait to see what Apple did. Because after Apple made their announcement in September, we saw a bunch of new products come into the marketplace. The Surge, the LG R, the Moto 360, all came in with alternative experiences to what Apple was offering based on what they shared in September. And I mean, look at this. We see it's even year over year, it's more than double what it was last year from a consumer point of view. This is data pulled from retailers around the world, consumers talking about their wearable purchases. And this is a robust market. Apple will have an impact, but I don't think it's going to be as big as people think. We'll know as soon as it's out there and we have getting data, and we'll let everyone know what that is. But you know, when you see it, and these are the different brands. We track everybody. If there's a review, we got the data. Here's the Fitbit. Here's Garmin. Here's Jawbone, which continues to do well. All these different pieces. And they're gaining. They're gaining in droves. We get to see what did people get for their holiday. When they opened up a present over the holidays, what do they get? They got a Fitbit, or they got a Garmin. We see that over and over, but we also see the upstarts coming in as well. So this is kind of a 100% mindshare chart. And although you see Fitbit has really lost over the year, they've gained in the past 2 or 3 months. They really won a holiday and kind of come back. That little bobble right there, that's Basis when their new watch came out, then it faded. LG R, when it came out, really helped push things over as well as really good prices. Pebble came back. They were getting really crushed back in here, but Pebble's really come back strong. And Samsung continues to kind of peter down. They haven't had the same gains as others. But Jawbone and Garmin and Fitbit have all done really well. Moto's been more concerned by supply, and here you see Misfit. And so the market's robust. The experiments are out there. It'll be interesting to see how Apple makes a dent in this marketplace. We know they will. We just don't know how big it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be as big as people think, because there are already competitive experiences out there that people are very excited about. And it's a square. You know, it's got to be round. So, quick little review. We got to design these things for where people actually use them. This is the toughest environment that any products ever really had to perform on, a human wrist. I mean, this is all kinds of things happen here on the wrist. You know, you pick up the dog. There's all kinds of stuff that takes place that this gets involved in that other things don't. We got to figure out the usability issues, right? Row your boat is not a solution make. It was great when I was 4. Row, especially in a round. You get everyone together. Now we can all do it with our smartwatches. Row your boat. And round is in, but we can't continue to force those things on consumers. We have to figure out a way to bring people into experiences they already understand how to use. And watch that learning curve. As the creators of these devices, we're too close to them. We aren't necessarily divorced enough from the experience to think as novices again and realize what we actually are forcing people to go through. It's painful. And of course, habit forming is good. Being addicted to your wearable is not a bad thing. But if you're going down the gamification path, you got to keep making glue. And that's really it. We have a free wearables newsletter you can sign up for. And now, if there's any questions, let's see, how much time, Alex, do we have for? Yes, they'll be. I'll make them available in SlideShare on our blog, and I think they'll be available through Wearables TechCon as well.
If you had to predict some winners, say a year or two from now, between Samsung, Android Wear, Pebble, and Apple, how do you see market share being split up if you had to guess?
I think Pebble will continue to have a strong niche play. I think that they are, they understand who their customer is, and they're doing a great job servicing that customer. I think Apple will have significant share. Whether they will take it as away from Fitbit remains to be seen. Fitbit's got some issues with the surge they have to fix. I think Garmin also ends up being a bit niche because they're targeting more of the fitness aficionados, and they've been designing for durable up front. The question is, what about the misfits, the Samsungs? I think Samsung they're trying to find their way in the forest. And they're doing what Samsung typically does. They experiment on the market rather than thinking about the design up front and reducing so many different, I mean, the gear came with a camera so you could do nasal selfies, Nelfies? I mean, come on. And so Samsung's still trying to figure out the should from the could. And until they figure out the should, they're going to continue to trail and lose share. People talk about them a lot. And I think you end up with this kind of Pebble crowd who likes simple and limited functionality, kind of the Palm Pilot, 4 apps, right? When the Palm Pilot came out, just these things. And then there's the people who are more in the Pebble camp but want something that's more watch-like, and that's where the Martian notifiers and some of the other devices we've seen come out lately that are more limited in what they do. But let's see. Go back to that slide and see who's kind of driving that. LG has something with the R, and the new Urbane got quite a bit of attention earlier in the week of Mobile World Congress. Moto and LG, if they figure out a way to kind of start driving their supply issues and driving that across more folks, I think they have a chance to really give the Apple Watch for a challenge. My guess, though, is that Apple will launch with a higher volume of mind share than LG or Moto at this stage. But I think long term, it's anyone's game. They just got to solve these issues because they're all over.
Staying on that slide, so the Fitbit, does your algorithm differentiate between all the other Fitbit devices and the smartwatch? Is it watch or is it?
We can separate them out, so we have. So earlier when I showed you the bands versus watches, that was separated out. We could do the same thing here.
So the traffic, you're able to really differentiate between the two.
We can go down to individual review. Yeah, it's kind of scary. It's a lot of fun. I love our data. Used it to buy a washing machine. We chose wisely.
Beyond consumerism, what do you see as the value proposition? In other words, consumerism is generating dollars for the company selling it, but I don't see any value in the watches themselves. I mean, they don't perform a function that hasn't been performed before.
No, that's true, right? They don't represent a new level of functionality. It's more of we're at the novelty stage of this market, right? The fitness band, I think, are here to stay because of the monitoring. Basically, when we first started doing this for Best Buy, we put Fitbit in with the pedometers because that's what they do. They count steps. And there's something about monitoring that becomes important for a lot of different people for health outcomes and their own kind of habits or neuroses. You know, I'm OCD about my steps. 999, 999, yeah. How many bottles of beer on the wall? How many bottles of beer? How many steps do I have to take care of that bottle of beer on the wall? Sorry, that was entirely random. But in that novelty, they will find a use case. The same way the smartphone did, right? Because when the iPhone came out, everyone thought it was going to fail. But it fundamentally changed the experience that we have with our devices. There are devices out there coming that change things. The Basis didn't change my life in ways I thought it would. The sleep monitoring, we can talk about that. But to your point, there's no killer app yet that's going to drive widespread adoption. Right now, this is all novelty. But they're working on it, so.
Do you see these products transitioning out of the consumer markets into industrial applications the same way that tablets have at some point?
Definitely. There's a bunch of different press written by people smarter than I am around not only enterprise uses, to the point where people are scared about having their wearable being telling them where they are. Oh, that's your 4th bathroom break this morning. I'm sorry, I had a lot of coffee. And the medical ones are obviously huge. It's interesting, though, when I talk to folks that are in the medical wearable space, they describe the things that they want to do to patients as opposed to with patients. And there are so many lessons to be learned about what a good wearable experience is that drive that. Because in no other market is stickiness as important as is in medical wearables. I had one guy that described to me about, oh, we had this great wearable shirt that people have to wear after they have heart surgery, but it has all these cool things in it because then you can monitor this and do that. I'm like, how do you get them to wear it? Well, they have to because the doctor told them to. All right, I just got through open heart surgery. I already feel sick and diseased and not great, and you have to make me wear this shirt? I feel like a loser. No, this isn't going to work. And so the more we can learn about how to create sticky medical experiences, that's the part where wearables will take off, because that's actually saving lives. And I don't think it's Flappy Bird, but I think the medical space becomes really interesting as long as it kind of, where wearables fall short today is a lot of times, especially in the fitness band category, they end up being not a dialogue with the user. One of the things that drives me nuts about the base is that it doesn't tell me. It knows whether I'm close or not, but it doesn't tell me. It knows when I should wake up, but it doesn't tell me. There's no notification piece. There's no dialogue. And I think with medical wearables, there's a huge opportunity to give dialogue with individuals to help them understand, am I making progress? Am I at risk? All those, not in a naggy kind of, mom kind of way. Did you do your steps today? No, Mom. But how do you start scaffolding that into a way that becomes sticky behaviors and truly habit-forming and habit-supporting? I think that's a huge opportunity in that space. And there's also notions within compliance and retail. There's a bunch of different things that start to work from that standpoint. I think one of the places where this potentially becomes really interesting is from a security standpoint, multi-factor. Because I don't always have my phone, I don't always have my watch, I don't always have my keys, but I always have one of those things. Except when I'm in the shower, but some people want to wear these in the shower too. Water on. Oh, welcome, John. Would you like the news? I'm like, how did you know it was me? Oh, I have my wearable on. So, yeah, I can pontificate probably too much. I'll be quiet.
So the LG watch is going to come out with one you can actually talk on. It acts as a phone. What have you seen in terms of demand or like or dislike for those features?
So the Galaxy Gear S is Samsung's Dick Tracy phone. And the few people that have it like it. That's another niche play. Huawei is, I think, it's going to have a LTE radio in it too. Because, it can be kind of, meet me at the corner, right? You feel like you're in the Secret Service or something. Yes, I'm right, it's like, get out the Bluetooth headset. Yes, I'll see you. Yes, I will have the package at 8. And I'm talking about picking up my kids, but I feel important because I have the wrist phone. Yes, It depends on how the peripheral. I think there's a segment of wearables in which the watch becomes our authentication token into our cloud assets, and voice becomes a natural. There's no reason that the only reason I don't want to put a cell radio on this is because of battery life, because this can hold a bigger battery. That will probably cook my wrist. I just switched, 6 radios driving to work today. Yeah. But I think, again, similar to the Pebble users, there will be a niche of folks who want to make calls on these devices.
The Apple Watch does that through the phone now.
In terms of the notification piece?
No, you can talk to it.
Yeah, it's just Bluetooth. But the question is, it doesn't have its own cell radio. It's just tethered. The S actually has their own radio, but you know that. Other? Okay.
In your opinion, what is the best way to make sure the learning curve is right, such that you're not skipping the obvious bits that prevent the users from seeing the core features?
A couple things. I think one is you got to figure out what features are necessary to have that first victory lap. Right? What are those features that make you feel like you mastered? Like Angry Birds, that first level, I get the motion down. I can do that. What's your first 2 levels that make sense? And make sure that those are levels that actually make sense to the individual. right? If I pull out my new wearable and the first level is how to configure the font on the watch face, I've done nothing for the user. But if it's how to put my kid's picture as the background on my watch face, okay, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I could do that. You know, how do you make sure that whatever those first levels are create value for the user and aren't just the cool features you want to show off? That's the other piece. And limit it. Don't go the Swiss Army knife, go the chef knife. Swiss Army knife with all these features, too much. Show them how to do one thing really, really well. And maybe it's a sync thing. You know, it really depends on the context. You know, it's how do you, but having those stories down is absolutely critical. And then test it with people. I mean, that's obvious with all this stuff is you got to test it. Test it with people you know, trusted people off the street. You can talk to mom and things like that. But try to approach it from the standpoint of new. Because we all become immune to seeing the blind spots once we've been in the industry for even 6 months kind of a thing. And it becomes a real source of discipline to look at it with new eyes. And that's the hard part. That is the hard part. But constrain it. And narratives help a ton, right? Because at the end of the day, what's an innovation? It's a story that we want to have a starring role in. And the products and services are just the props that we use to have that starring role. We all want to be heroes. And the product has to bring you into that hero's journey, but not through the whole, having your parents killed and stuff that Disney does all the time, right? But you have to take them through that journey, and story helps a lot, especially for that first out-of-the-box experience. Okay, with that, thank you all so much. Oh, yeah, I can do that. Whoops, that one? Yeah. Cool. Thank you all so much for your time.